things that is so great. I can't even be jealous of the guy that produced this because it's so far out of my league. I'm amazed that something like Beethoven or Plato exists at all. But Plato is at his best in the Republic, and I'm hoping that you will enjoy this and that you will change the way you think. It's the best way I can explain it. It was like an atomic bomb in my brain when I was 20 years old. And I was thinking, yes, yes, turn yourself on.
I think, Bobby, your mic might be bleeding here and there. The
Turn
one
it on.
driving. That's it.
Yeah, I think you can mute like in the bottom left corner.
Possibly so. I'd like to hear from you. Uh, have you read Plato's Republic before? I guess that would be my first question. Come on, somebody has to say, yeah, I have read it.
Yes,
Please.
Yes.
I've read most
Yeah.
of it, but not
All right, the whole thing?
Yeah.
Or
No.
you get some
Yes.
excerpts, which,
Yeah.
no, it's,
I just read it during a philosophy
yeah, the whole
class.
thing at once. Yeah, absolutely.
I've not read it. This will be the first time.
Okay, here's the deal. It used to be in Japanese counting of birthdays. The actual day you were born was your first birthday, not your zero birthday as we do it here. All right. And it turns out that although excuse me, I just have a little problem with my back. That although I got a bit more in, sorry. At all. Okay, they're in. I'm sorry, what was I? China and Greece, 0 and 1.
You were talking about Japan and the 0th birthday.
China. Okay, yeah. What was that? Oh, and you'll find that this is actually connected to the Republic because if you start at the 0 birthday, all right, you're going to have a very different capacity to manipulate numbers. One of the things that you need to know about the Republic, or in some ways about all the Greeks, is that they're primarily concerned with explaining how arithmetic is possible. In other words, you get all kinds of poetry, you get all kinds of metaphor and religion and miracles and a whole bunch of other stuff. And yet, when people do arithmetic, there's surprisingly little argument to have. And what they're trying to find out, how can we get certainty? And Plato's going to take a stab at that in this book. So the Republic is arguably, I'm going to argue that it's a book that can change your mind and change your life. Those of you who know the other Platonic dialogues will be at something of an advantage, and we're going to look at a couple of those, including the symposium. But we're going to think about heroism and what it means to be an excellent human being. And Plato's going to give us a set of virtues, wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, which I actually think are really great ideas. I mean, don't leave home without them. So we'll be doing Plato, and that's what our year will be about. But in getting ready for it, I have to show you some of the other currents of thought going on. All right. So Homer is the great educator of Greece, and Plato thinks he has to go. He's a miseducator. Imagine if young men, aristocratic men who are going to have some influence when they grow up, just think that it's a good idea to behave like Achilles, right? Who's really mentally undeveloped. And that actually did happen. There is no, that's not unusual. But the same sort of thing would be a problem with Odysseus. Odysseus is smarter, but he lacks a moral focus until he actually gets home and pulls things together. But if you stop and think about what Odysseus does right after they leave Troy, full of loot and everything, they sack a city for no good reason, and then they get into a conflict with the Cyclops, and Odysseus gives in to his childish arrogance, and the result is that he has the terrible 10 years getting home because of his own arrogance. So these are flawed heroes. These are flawed conceptions of human excellence in Plato's understanding. The question then that has to get addressed is, what makes somebody excellent? There's version 1.0, I will kill you. There's version 2.0, which is, I can trick you or I can kill you. And the third version is Socrates. And he said, you're tricking yourself, and that will lead to you killing you, which is sadly true. In other words, Socrates is an ironic Odysseus and an ironic Achilles. And the Platonic dialogues taken together are one giant artistic and intellectual structure. You wouldn't think that possible, since this is, easily 2,000 pages of serious reading, but it's somewhat like the 18 holes on a golf course, right? Some of the holes are more famous and more difficult than others, but they all are connected by a kind of architect that has a pattern in mind. We won't do all of them, but we'll do a couple. We'll do the symposium, which is very important. And we're also going to do some of the great dramatists as well. I think there's a lot to be learned from tragedy as well as comedy. And we'll also talk briefly about lyric poetry as well. So I'm hoping that you'll enjoy a chance to swim in the deep water, but not be in any danger of drowning. There are no exams. It's all chill, right? It would be advantageous to you if you want to learn to get the reading done before the lecture and the discussion. But, if you can't, you can't. I mean, it's a movable feast, right? So those of you who have read The Republic, let me tell you the sad truth. You haven't. And that's what was going on with China there, of course. The first time you read The Republic is not your first time. It's your 0th time. All right. You think you understood what you read. No, you didn't. You think you didn't understand what you read. You have no idea how far you are from understanding what's going on there. Right. So you can't read Plato's Republic until you've already read it once. I will explain that later on. It's true. Okay. And if you want to read outside literature or sources, you can. There are lots of them, but I wouldn't actually. I just go back and look at the thing again. I mean, if you're musicians, you're never going to lose by listening to Beethoven attentively. And if you're a thinker or a writer, Plato will teach you how to think and how to write. And he will do things with a book. And I can guarantee this for you right now. Honest to God, you will say, like I did when I figured it out, I didn't know books could do that. So stuff beyond what you think you can do with a book, he does. And he's an extraordinary thinker. I think the greatest thinker in the Western tradition. And I think this is his greatest book. So I'm teaching that because I love it, and I hope you grow to love it too. And loving it involves criticizing it. The best thing you can do to be a student of Plato is not to roll over and play dead and say that Plato taught me ABC and that's what the world is. That's not what he's trying to teach you. There aren't any Platonic dogmas exactly, because they're shifting. They're always tentative, hypothetical, and provisional. We'll see what comes next. So you'll find that Plato is not as dogmatic as he is often described. And in addition to that, Socrates certainly is the patron saint of rational inquiry. So I'm hoping that when you get the stuff that surrounds it, you'll understand what the Republic is really about. And you can't do that until at least your second reading, which is really your first. I've read it something more than 50 times. Read it as much as I've read Measure for Measure. It's just one of those things. Really need.
Plus half hour.
Take him out.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah,
Yellow?
and if there's any actual days off, like
One
you already
five
had
zero
off,
three three
for
three
example,
three zero
Sorry,
nine.
hey guys, move yourselves.
between those days, there's 2 days that you already have
Alright,
off. You need to do that separately. Like you need to do it into separate.
Okay.
That's from,
I'm sorry, I'm hopeless with digital stuff, and my memory, particularly of old books, is well, a lot of it has flowed down into my beard. My beard is sentient, and it contains everything that I knew once that I've forgotten. So I'll try and explain why the Greeks are so important. I'll compare them historically to the Chinese, which is the real important comparison. I'm going to talk about different conceptions of human excellence. We might call that virtue. The Greeks called it arete. So this is a course that's interesting because it offers us topics to explore that people don't usually get involved with. And, you don't need to get a grade at the end. So everybody that's here wants to be here and listen and talk and read. And I'm actually amazed there are this many people that still read. It seems like books are obsolete. Tell me any questions that you might have about this? About Homer or Plato?
come on.
Yeah, I do. Well, in the lecture, you talk about the 3 versions
Come here.
of the Greek hero,
Yeah.
and it's clear that version 1.0 and 2.0 were obviously widely spread through Homer, but version 3.0 is Socrates. How was that infused through Greek society? Because Plato isn't as accessible as Homer. So how was Socrates? How did Socrates influence the mass of ancient Greece?
He didn't influence the mass of ancient Greece. He had no interest in the mass of ancient anything. As a matter of fact, modern anything. He was a Greek, which means he believes in human inequality, like the Romans. If you like the idea of human inequality, you're not going to find it in the Greco-Romans. That is one of the real big issues here. Right? So what Christianity is going to add is the stuff that the Greco-Romans let slide because they're all being reasonable. Right. So I'd be inclined to say that Socrates is a unique kind of hero. And if you've ever read the Symposium, it turns out that Socrates is in disguise. He's not really human. He's not a god, but he's not human. He's a powerful spirit which mediates between heaven and earth. It's the spirit of love. I mean, and look, he falls in love with his beloved, not Xantippe, but a priestess whose name was Diotima, and in Greek that means the honor of God. So you're going to find that Socrates is not going to be like. Look, there are many ways in which you can compare the Homeric heroes with other heroes going around crashing and killing things. Medieval epics, both in Europe and in West Africa, have pretty much the same kind of characters doing pretty much the same kind of things. On the other hand, Socrates, there's not many of that. That's an unusual thing. And there's nobody exactly like him. Even Alcibiades says that at the end of the Symposium. So a hero of peaceful violence who hurts your pride, not your life. And actually having your pride subtracted from you is agonizing, and it's what everybody needs. So Socrates is unlike anybody else, and that's why I think that he's well worth thinking about and well worth reading. Now remember that Plato, one of the things that talking about was the seventh letter. Nobody knows if it's real or not. Most scholars think the others aren't, which places it in kind of dubious company. I think we have to be fair there, but maybe we can do some special pleading for this, because it tells us that Plato has some esoteric doctrine. Now, if you've ever read Plotinus or Neoplatonism or any of the mumbo jumbo that might be derived from Plato's occasional walk into a sort of poetic cul-de-sac in which he gives you a myth because he doesn't know what else he's supposed to say. So Plato is primarily an artist who was corrected by Socrates into making moral art. And that's one of the most important questions in aesthetics just by itself. What's the relationship between aesthetics and ethics? Do we judge ethics on the basis of beauty, or do we judge art or aesthetics on the basis of morality, however you define that, utilitarian or Kantian or whatever it is, which is Trump? So we're going to read a book that is about everything, which is kind of unusual. You're going to find that Plato's Republic talks about every topic of serious concern to anyone looking at the human predicament. And I love it. And I actually like teaching it to people, especially the point where there are a couple of points where I know your jaws are going to drop and you're going to, oh, and that's when it will be changing your mind. You'll feel new grooves being cut in your brain by Plato. It happened to me. If things work out, it'll happen to you. All right. Anybody else have any questions about what I'm doing or why I'm doing it? Or, I would like people to know about this. I think it's good for them.
I actually had a question.
Oh, you're back, Evan?
Yes. Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember you. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully for good reasons. Me and some other people who are also in this chat were discussing what the one thing stuck out particularly we got into a big discussion about, which was when Plato says that he tried to advise Dionysius in the pursuit of virtue, but above all to become a friend to himself. And we were kind of wondering what that means, and it devolved into kind of a discussion of pitting Nietzsche against Plato. But I was hoping
you're moving in the right direction there. I mean,
but I was hoping you could shed some light on maybe what
we don't need. I mean, I know that Nietzsche is better known, so I understand the reach to him, and that's a very good choice, tell you the truth. But if you want to get somebody more contemporary to Plato, you'll find a big chunk of what you're going to find in Nietzsche in Callicles. He takes up the last third of the dialogue called the Gorgias. His idea is that you want big appetites to satisfy them all the time, and then you want even bigger appetites to satisfy them. So if you can be a totally megalomaniacal, authoritarian sort of ruler, that's the best possible life, because freedom is libido, and this gives you a chance to maximize your libido. Okay, and Socrates says, no, actually, that's a grossly imbalanced soul. You've already messed up your mind. You're going to mess up your life. And this is really a bad idea. And seeing these guys go at it is, I think, that Nietzsche, Socrates conflict that you were talking about. Go back and have a look at him. That's why, again, Nietzsche is a wonderful writer, but if you read back enough into the stuff that he had, a lot of it gets lifted. right? Dionysus. I mean, that's quite a name for yourself. The problem is that these rulers, these tyrants, both Dion and Dionysus, got bad educations. Their souls were corrupted. Think of what Plato believes in the Republic, and of course, if your soul is corrupt, then you're not going to behave in an ethically proper fashion. And if you're not moral, then politics goes awry, because what you want to do is impose moral order on politics. Right? So this is actually a very complicated, interesting argument. And if any of you know the kids' game Chutes and Ladders, right, where you go to one and then you slide down and you find yourself over on the other side of the board doing something you hadn't expected to be doing, up or down or crossways. Imagine much of the verbal uniqueness, weirdness of the Republic stems from the fact, and Marcus Aurelius in Proverbs, yes, you're right, but please don't lead me not astray. What am I?
You were talking about the chutes and ladders of Plato's
Oh yeah,
Republic.
okay, yeah, all right. Imagine Chutes and Ladders, but on something more like a continental scale. I mean, the things that go on inside this, and the things that you will, you open one door. Have you ever seen The Matrix and then you find yourself in the mountains? Well, Plato does that all the time, just with words. I mean, it's messed up. It will mess with your brain. You will realize that you didn't realize it would be that smart. All right. He's thought up the answers to questions that you wouldn't have thought up. So Plato is like Chutes and Ladders, and it's a very complicated sort of structure. Have you ever seen that thing, three-dimensional chess? All right, well, Plato plays n-dimensional chess. And I'm surprised that anybody can do that, but he can. Trust me on this. If at the end of a year you come and you read this stuff and you find that, no, this guy's a real Phoebe, what a lame, I really forgot nothing out of Plato, I'm going to have to reevaluate my occupation, because I guarantee that this is some of the best stuff that ever was created by ink and paper. I've read lots of books, and this is I think this is the greatest single book ever written. I get a lot of crap from people, not a lot, but some, when they hit me back with the Bible. But we're not taking that. First of all, you can't get help from God, right? We won't have that. Second of all, it's not a book. It's a small library written over like 1,000 years by probably 1,000 people, scribes and all the rest of this. And so, no, I'm not going to be pushed back on this. I've read the Bible and really like it, but I really like Plato. And I know that's damnable, but I really do. I feel like Petrarch felt about Cicero. I mean, I'd like to be a Christian if this wasn't so goddamn beautiful. And then I'm thinking, well, now I'm feeling all Athenian. Right? No, I mean, who's more seductive than Socrates? And who's more chaste? Allow that to mess with your mind for a while, right? That's how he drives you into a frenzy, He's a unique and amazing character. There are others that I like in the same league, like Confucius or Ashoka. But I got to admit, Socrates is inimitable. He once was the stories about him are apocryphal, or we don't know if they're apocryphal, but they may be not. But a young man came up to Socrates in the Agora one day, and he said, Socrates, my parents have arranged a marriage for me. You're a married man, you have a family. What do you say? Is it a good idea for me to get married or not? And he said, and he stopped, thought about it. Yes, the Buddha is impressive. Don't do that to me. But Socrates said to him, yeah, by all means, get married. It's a good idea, young man. And you have to remember that back then they didn't have romantic love and dating and stuff. All marriages are arranged. So he said, yeah, it's a good idea, young man, because if you get a good wife, you'll become happy. And if you get a bad wife, you'll become a philosopher. Right. And he has had a lot of strife with Xanthippe, his wife, because she wants him to get a job. And he thinks that, no, I really have to go talk about the form of the good. And she's really not up for this because, she wants some income. So Socrates had a great sense of humor. And the only thing he found funny in the dialogues is his own death. But most of the dialogues are both comic and tragic at the same time, and epic. And that really will tell us something. Socrates not only intends to take on Homer for primacy in Greek culture, he intends to supersede all of Greek literature. They have one great epic poet, Homer. He's done. I got a new Homeric hero, better than 1 and 2 put together. In addition to that, those of you who know Socrates' death scene, the Phaedo, he laughs, and that's necessary because everybody else is crying. You know why? Because Plato, although we're going to kick tragedy out in the Republic because it's so wicked, we are at the same time going to replace it with something better. It's called Plato. The same way we're going to replace Homer with something better called Plato. Now, when we get to the symposium, it's going to turn out that Aristophanes, who lampoons Socrates, is a pig. And Plato is going to be really unkind with Aristophanes because he's settling some scores because he thinks Aristophanes helped kill his master. But the point is this, looking back at the symposium, or rather at the Phaedo where Socrates
Did you
died.
find the money?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Oh,
What?
You gonna go swim?
No, I'm gonna pick up my laundry.
hello?
Guys, mute your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We hear you, sir.
Sorry.
We just hear other people that should not
All
be
right, I'm
speaking.
sorry. I don't know what they're doing.
Is there a way you as a host can disable other people's mics just in general? I
suppose
know
that
there is a
could.
general setting, but I think it's only available to
Oh
the
yeah, I
host.
see. I think it says mute all. Do you want me to mute all? I don't want to mute all unless you
I
might
mean-
have a question to ask or something to say.
We could
And that's
always
really
just
what I
message
want.
our questions.
All right.
I think if you mute all, I think people can still unmute, but it means people who are idle in the chat who have accidentally left their mics unmuted won't.
All right. Well,
leave.
let's try it. I mean, let's experiment with digital technology. Now you are all muted. Mute all current and new participants. That must suck. So, no dialectic for us, eh?
Okay, so I can still unmute and can you hear me?
Oh, you can. Yeah. Oh, yes, I
Okay.
can.
All right, so that didn't do anything.
All right.
Well, no,
because-
it does. It's for the people who are not necessarily contributing, but are just idle and they don't realize that they're not muted.
Oh yeah, I'm all right. I remember where I was stopped. Okay. The reason why in his death scene, Socrates is laughing and everybody else is crying is Plato's taking over tragedy and comedy too. You see, those are all going to have to go when we start censoring every kind of literature. But lucky for us, we have something to put exactly in its place. So the greatest epic writer, Homer, he's on the way out. The greatest tragedians take them all on and crush them with Socrates' death scene. You want to see something that gives you fear and pity, human stupidity, and malice. They have something to be afraid of. You know what's funny? These people think that my death is a big deal. If it's a big deal, I would be worried about it. Let me help you out here. You guys are all weeping. Why? Because I'm going. Oh, well, what do you want it from me? I'm 70 years old and I'm drinking hemlock. So it's a combination of comedy, tragedy, epic, and if you go to the Phaedrus, you will find that it's a kind of erotic personal poetry out in nature outside the walls of the city. And everybody that gets referenced there is a lyric poet because Plato is gunning them down. So if you understand there are four kinds of Greek literature, and Plato's decided, well, we can get rid of this because I have something else, me. And in addition to that, I'd like to make a foundational contribution to ethics and politics, and also to metaphysics. I want to solve most of the outstanding problems of my age. Oh, and also I'd like to start a new religion, a kind of rational monotheism, where you tell Yahweh not to have any more feelings and just sit there being a crystal. All right, it's pretty much the same thing. Yahweh gets pissed off, the crystal just sits there, looking. I mean, with an expression on its crystalline face. Are you stupid? I mean, it's not going to intervene. It's not that interesting in us. That's one of the things you're going to find with the Greek account of God in Plato and Aristotle. They're very different from us, and you can sort of understand that they're not all interested in us. All right, it's one of the nice things about monotheism. Plato's given us a cold monotheism, an impersonal monotheism, but that's what it's going to turn out to be. We're all going to worship the form of the good. We're going to dance around and say how it creates all reality and all understanding and all of everything that could ever be said. But it turns out it can't be said. So it's just really great. It is a little bit like the sacred name of Yahweh. I mean, you can't say it. Language breaks down when you hit that black hole of this absolute thing. Right? And what happens then? Plato comes out and gives us the old poetic soft shoe. That reminds me of a myth. And Plato's dropping in myths all the time. But fortunately for us, we won't need anybody else because he'll make all our myths for us, like the myth of at the end, or the myth of the metals in the beginning, or any of the other myths that get introduced, the noble lie, for example. So Plato is the true Renaissance man. I think that his mind is in the same league as Einstein or Newton or Goethe or I don't know who else I would choose, Shakespeare. But I mean, much as I admire Shakespeare, and look, it is the test of a real poet, of a real dramatist, to be able to write both first-rate comedies and first-rate tragedies. Think of how few people can do that. But Shakespeare could, Goethe could, and ironically, Plato could. All right, now let's move further. Let's see, well, how many of them wrote epics? Well, there's a mock epic for Shakespeare, so you might make that work. Well, how many started their own religion? Well, there you see, Plato is starting to leave people behind. Well, how about solving all the intellectual problems of your age? Well, things are simpler then. In other words, Plato was sort of like the Vegematic on late night TV. I mean, it slices, it dices, it walks your dog, it locks the door, it does every possible thing you could want a book to do, and a whole collection of stuff that you don't know that books can do. And once you find out they can, you're going to want that too. So this is going to be a great time, I think. And I would like to have more back and forth in the evening after you hear whatever it is I have to say. And then I was hoping that we could have a drink together and relax and enjoy this, because there's no competition here, there's no grades, no salesman will call. It's just we'll talk about some stuff that's really cool. And I want to do this before my brain completely turns into Swiss cheese and I end up hiding my own Easter eggs. So I'm thinking maybe I should start to download some of the stuff I know, and I have with the lectures that I put up, but there's so many other things I would like to say. Any questions about what's going on, what we're doing, how we're doing it like this?
Yes, I have a question.
Hi.
Yes, hi. Good evening. I was pretty intrigued by your emphasis quite times about considering Plato to be an artist.
Oh yeah.
And it kind of reminded me of when I read What is Philosophy by Deleuze. And he was saying that philosophy is the art of creating concepts. And here is an inquiry that I have, because I've always been intrigued by, although my knowledge of Plato is, less than a drop, is exactly what you said, that he kind of was rejecting Homer as a miseducator. And as an artist that created the concept of, which I think probably is the most potent concept created by human being, the concept of idea. And so I was always wondering, like, what's the material? Like what did he work with? I mean, it's like the academic approach would be to go look for, I don't know, what was happening at that time and that kind of stuff, but I get like a shadow of an idea of his method.
Okay.
But I'm always intrigued by the material.
Plato is infinitely intriguing. If there's as many hidden word games as to say Joyce. All right, if you've read Joyce's novels, I mean, they're spectacular in their complexity. Sometimes like a labyrinth, more than like a path to enlightenment that's not too demanding. But with Plato, there's another good apocryphal story, independent of his marriage advice. And this was to Plato himself. Now, this, again, it's not written down. It's part of the oral tradition that surrounds him, a little bit like the oral tradition that surrounds Confucius. Okay. Plato one day met Socrates early in the morning in the agora that just happened to pass by. And he said, Plato, you're not usually up this early. Where are you going? What have you got there under your arm? And Plato said, I am going to enter the competition that's going to be given during the spring festival. I have 3 tragedies and a satyr play, and Euripides or Aeschylus or Sophocles. I'm coming, and I'm gonna do this better than they ever have. And Plato actually was a very gifted poet, like Homer. And one of the funny things that you'll see in Plato's attitude towards Homer is that there's at least a little bit of professional jealousy. I mean, he looks back at Homer and says, damn, that's good stuff. I mean, he's really good. Almost exactly the same feeling applies when you look at the way Nietzsche thinks about Homer or thinks about Socrates or Plato. The reason why he hates him so much is because he has professional jealousy. He says to himself, my God, this guy's talented. This has got to be stopped. So there's a little bit of the anxiety of influence going on there. But Plato has something to prove, that he's the universal all-purpose poet. Every genre of literature is now going to be taken over by him. And then he's going to instruct some magistrates in what other poetry to allow. Okay, so it comes with its own theory of art, its own aesthetics. So this is literally a poem that explains how you're supposed to think about poetry. That's messed up. No, it has all these kinds of things in it that will mess with your mind. Do not think that people only started thinking up messed up things recently. Plato really he can tweak all kinds of stuff in your brain, and I will help him do it. But let me come back to the story. Socrates says, well, what you got there? And he says, I got these tragedies. I'm going to the archons, and I'm going to apply, because they look through all the submissions and they choose the three best writers, and they each produce a trilogy of tragedies. And so Plato says, look, I'm going to get accepted. This is my first year out, and then I'm going to win that prize. Okay. Socrates said, that's great, because I'm deeply impressed with you and with poetry and a whole bunch of other stuff that's been going on here in Athens. And I was wondering, do you think you could give an old man a taste, a preview of, what is so great about this new thing that you've that you've written. And so Plato, because he's young and thinks he's on top of things and is full of hubris, and also a hugely talented poet at the same time, begins reading what he thinks are the really good parts in his tragedy of Socrates. And he spent the whole day with Socrates, and Socrates kept asking him questions about the poetry he had written. And at the end of the day, Socrates went back home, and then Plato didn't enter the competition. He went back home and burned his tragedies. Now, think about what it would be like to get a sense of what the juvenilia of Plato looked like. You know, before he was moved in the direction of a moral orientation for aesthetics, right? Remember, apart from that, tragic writers are kind of complicated in their treatment of morality. I mean, think of Medea. She's angry. Fair enough. Is it necessary for her to murder her children? Well, I don't think so. How about when you expose kids to that? That sound like a good idea? Maybe Oedipus gouging out his own eyes or something else that's fun for the whole family? Well, Plato in the Republic comes up with the idea that education is the most important function of any government. And because it ultimately determines the character of a culture. And so many other things steal the limelight, but this is a book about education. And keep in mind that every philosophy of education is a disguised philosophy of human nature. Yeah. So that's in there too. There's also a philosophical psychology. We got an ethics, we got a political theory, we got a metaphysics. All the problems have been created by pre-Socratic physics and the guys who are working on extrapolations from that, like Anaxagoras or Empedocles. Well, Socrates has decided to solve their problems just in one big move. He's going to show them where in the big picture they are. And then he's going to do that with the poets. He's going to do it with the mathematicians, particularly the Pythagoreans, because they have math worship. And remember that Greece is all about, how is it possible we disagree about everything, but nobody argues about arithmetic? All right, so now we have a problem, and we're going to gnaw away at it, but Plato is the first one to bring a tree down. Said, look, I have a new system, a way of accounting for that. It does account for all of science and all of poetry and math and religion. Oh yeah, I have a myth for the afterlife and everything. You know, like I said, this is a book that does everything the books can do. All right, up there, I see her. I mean, I just see a hand, and I'm happy to get a golden hand. We're doing Discord or GroupMe. I have no idea what that means.
I just feel like this is I mean, the raise hand function, I think, is a pretty solid way of just, if somebody wants to, whatever.
Raising your hand.
Raise your hand.
What's up?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you would say that does Plato consider himself kind of like the final philosopher and like Hegel or something like that?
No.
Okay.
Plato is starting a living tradition. That's why he's so interested in the question of the living voice as opposed to the written document. If you look at the Phaedrus, which is not the Phaedo, the Phaedrus, which I mentioned earlier about when I was talking about lyric, you'll find that Socrates doesn't trust the written word because it can't defend itself. And it can give people that don't understand what it means all kinds of stupid, dangerous ideas. This is why at the very end of the Republic, we have a special child safety cap to make sure that the philosophically immature do not do anything really awful with the 300 pages that they fail to understand. So this is for Cephalus, and everybody liked Cephalus. They're not educable, which is why we booted them out of the discussion. And here's how it goes. Once upon a time, a guy was dead, but he wasn't really dead, but he still went to the places where dead people go. And he found out you can't bribe the gods. Found out the gods, it's like Santa Claus. He knows if you've been sleeping. He knows if you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. You get omniscient, perfect justice. What does that mean? This has to replace the system of myths that allowed Cephalus to think that he could bribe his way out of Hades, which is what he spent the book doing. All right. So Plato is offering us a unified cosmos. He steps up to all the serious intellectual problems of his life or of his time. And it's the most concentrated stuff I've ever read. Because I'm awful at math. I'm sure there's some great, real concentrated math. But in terms of how closely it has to be read, it's like Wittgenstein's Tractatus, only it looks like we're breezing through this. The real fact is that every word is in place and has a purpose. Trust me on this, I'll show you. Kevin Hine with the golden hand. Yes, 2 golden hands, actually. Let's start with a third golden hand. Do any of them talk?
Hi, Dr. Sugrue.
Hi.
So
Kevin.
I've been thinking about like the trajectory of philosophy, and there's a book by Lloyd P. Gerson called Platonism and Naturalism: The Possibility of Philosophy. And we've talked before, and you called Kant neo-Stoicism. Who's the I just forgot the name, I'm blanking on it. Who is he reacting to? Who awoke from his dogmatic slumber? Hume sounds like Gorgias, who wants to say that nothing exists. The 20th century philosophy, the best one would be Wittgenstein, but he rejects metaphysics. So this is a big accusation, but has it all just been downhill since Plato?
No. We do some things better now than they used to do then, like the abolition of slavery and stuff. We've learned from history.
But I would say that the abolition of slavery would work with the form of justice. We learn what the form of justice is through time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it could be, as it says in the 7th letter, which we looked at, is that there are certain ultimate realities that language cannot grasp, and you cannot have a linear progression from the first 4 things that you know about something to the thing that he describes as the 5th, which is some kind of spark of divine knowledge. What Plato is trying to do here is have his cake and eat it too. He wants to be the most rational mystic around, and he really has to decide what he wants to do. But Plato says, no, I don't. That's why I do poetry, because I can argue for this, and I can also make this so beautiful that it's very hard to pick this apart without feeling that you're missing something. So I think that Plato is great because he teaches you how to read and he teaches you how to think. And I hope you like his acquaintance. All right. Another golden hand, Vinny Machado. Hello, Vinny.
I was just wondering if you can say anything regarding your preference to Bloom's translation.
Bloom was my teacher in college. I had this what do I call it? I had this epiphany about the Republic. I was taking courses with Bloom and another one with Cropsey, the guy that wrote with Strauss that big, thick, gigantic political philosophy book. Well, when I got to U of C, Strauss was gone, dead, but it was a heavily Straussian place, and because that's a high-powered kind of intellectual weirdness. And Bloom himself was, and so was Cropsey, both kind of weird guys. The reason why I like the Bloom is, first of all, because it's as literal as you're going to get. So where Plato uses Dike, every time that gets translated in the same way as justice, or arete gets translated as virtue. It's when people start to get clever and sort of poetic and saying, look, Plato really isn't up to standard, that Bloom is at his best. he was like a little wizard. He's a really strange individual and dressed impeccably. But Bloom said, look, the best thing a translator can do is to actually get it across to the next generation. They want to read Plato. They don't want to read you. And that's actually, a wonderful thing to keep in mind. Now, Bloom, his introduction, what does they call it? The translator's preface. Oh, that's great. Maybe there's an introduction as well, but the translator's preface is a small masterpiece of intellectual malice. Oh, does he torture Jowett and everybody else because this stuff they don't want to talk about. Some of them are just because they're Victorians, others because they just can't have Plato telling noble lies, because lies can't be noble, because they bring that presupposition in, and then Plato has to be noble, they describe it as, well, something that's not a lie at all. And Bloom's point is that it says lie. All the other times we have that word, that says lie too. So Jowett translates it to something like a useful flight of fancy. And Bloom just goes nuts on this. So he's, a nasty piece of work. It's the most venomous, 10 pages or so you're going to read anytime soon. In other words, Plato's Republic has been translated a dozen times. Why do we need another one of these? Because everybody thinks they're smarter than Plato. And I don't think so. So I'm going to give you that one-to-one correspondence. You want beauty? Well, you can have beauty, but not Plato's. When you translate it from Greek to English, I'm going to try and give you the best idea. And I think that was a very useful way of approaching translation. I know there are specialists that have their problems with it, but I think for the student, particularly the student without Greek, that's by far the one you would want to choose. Look, you don't want to get told about a useful flight of fancy if you don't know how to go back and look at the Greek, because it doesn't say that. Okay, so I like to use Bloom's. On the other hand, look, if you don't have access or it doesn't work out for you, read whatever copy of the Republic you have handy. It's all right, and sometimes the difference in translation can be actually very interesting. All right, who is the next golden hand? Yes, I will admit her. Elijah has been admitted. Okay.
I have a question, Dr. Sugrue.
Yeah.
So, can you address historical Socrates versus Plato's invention, and especially in the Republic? How much of actual Socrates do you think we see there, and how Plato is, I don't know, corrupting is a good word, but manipulating, I guess, Socrates to achieve his goals?
Okay. The straight answer, the short, direct answer is nobody knows. It's like trying to separate two sides of one coin. All right. What do we know about Socrates apart from Plato's portrait of him? We know a little bit from Xenophon, right? And there, because Xenophon has such a much more pedestrian mind, he's not nearly the brilliant thinker that Plato is. Socrates comes off as like a practical wise man, but nothing epoch-making like you get in Plato. It's more like Benjamin Franklin, a wise old man that we like. It's because Xenophon can't see anything beyond that. Now, what other evidence do we have about him? Well, apart from Xenophon, not a lot. So we have Plato, and Plato has turned him into a work of art. And was Socrates actually that artistic? Possibly so. I don't know, because he's not really like anyone else. So look, if you are a PhD, a professional scholar that's looking to nail down tenure in classics, go and get yourself an opinion about this. And then squeeze that evidence as hard as you can to make it say, like a ventriloquist dummy, that either Socrates and Plato are completely different or utterly separate, and the separation you have figured out by some magical discrimination in the way the thoughts are represented. But the honest thing is, nobody really knows. All right, Socrates is a man, a historical man, but he's also a cultural image, like David and Goliath, or Cain and Abel, or Oedipus. So I don't think it's possible to disentangle the history from the poetry. I mean, we get a little bit from Xenophon, but we really don't have very much. Same is true, strangely enough, of all the great world's spiritual teachers. It's true of Jesus. It's true of Confucius. It's true of most of the Hebrew prophets. It's true of Buddha. So I'd be inclined to say that it takes a unique kind of figure, and Sigmund Freud once said about Nietzsche that he's the only guy I can't analyze. I've looked at this too much, and I throw my hands up. Who knows what goes on in Nietzsche's head? And I kind of have the same feeling about Socrates. In other words, God only knows when he's being ironic or when he's telling you the level flat truth. He may be telling you both at different levels of understanding. He does mess up things like that. And if you mistake the irony for the literal speech, that takes you to Never Never Land. So trying to figure out how to dig yourself out from under problems that you create for yourself, Plato's good at teaching you that too. Plato's the beginning of philosophy. And what makes philosophy the unique activity it is that Plato taught Aristotle, and he's the right kind of student, because he said to his teacher, after great thought and study, "You're wrong, and here's why." That is the triumph of Socratic teaching. When you let them fly on their own and let them do what they want with your ideas. You're not trying to create bad examples of yourself. You're trying to figure out what they can do, particularly what they can do to improve on your thinking. What that does is create a tradition of mountaintop conversations. That's how Nietzsche describes the history of Western thought. And in a more coherent way, that's how Hegel describes it. So the first big speaker was Socrates, but he's something of an unknown quantity. The first great philosopher is Plato, and Socrates can be thought of as his alter ego, as his teacher, or as his greatest and most successful character. Remember, at the end of the Socratic dialogues, the last third of them or so, Socrates drops out of the discussion, and instead the main speaker is now called the Athenian stranger. And you could figure out who that might be. All right, who else? Give me a raised hand. Go ahead, don't be shy.
Hello, Professor. First of
Hi.
all, thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I had a question about the Homeric stories. Now, are the lessons in those more so straightforward, or do they require more pondering? For example, when Odysseus is talking to a dead Achilles, and Achilles says that something to the effect of that he would prefer to be working under a slave master than be with his dead lots. Now, is this lesson as simple as no matter what the circumstances, it's always better to be alive than dead, or something beyond that?
All right, here's he goes to talk to Achilles because Achilles is not going to be able to give you any kind of intelligent prognostication about the afterlife. Will it be worth it? Because Homer's going to write a whole poem about me, or is it so awful down here that I should have just stayed home and gotten over that childish search for kudos, search for honor and glory, time. And my view of it is that he's reformed. He's seen what being dead is like, and He says, life is more precious than you might actually believe. And so the idea is that first, what this is, it's a criticism of that 1.0 version of what a hero is. Okay. Yeah, let's go slay a bunch of stuff. Or, think of Norse invaders. If they die with sword in hand, they get to go on drunks at Valhalla and fight all the time. Well, okay, it turns out that you don't. Instead, you're in the shades here, and life is better than any such stuff. So what it is a rejection of a certain kind of suicidal heroic ethic, right? So that's what he learns. He learns empathy for Priam, and then he doesn't learn until after he's dead that he chose the wrong way. And then Odysseus, he's going to learn that war is not good for him. It was harmful to him. He was unfit to come home. And it wasn't until he was broken down and his hubris had been checked that he was capable of coming home and doing what needed to be done. Right? And the big conclusion is, it is unholy to vaunt over the bodies of the dead. That's in book 22, where he talks after the killing of the suitors. And what that means is, let's not write any more poems about people getting impaled. And the reason why is that this impaling each other stuff really isn't all it's cracked up to be. Right, here he is, he's 45 years old, he's been away for the last 20 years, and he hasn't been impaled, but he's impaled a great many people. Sometimes for a reason, sometimes just because they were there. Right, that's the moral problem, the moral ambiguity of Odysseus. Yeah, he's doing what's right according to the code of honor, but for example, raiding and destroying that city for no reason, it just happened to be there while he was on his way home. That means he kills things casually for no reason. That's got to be taken away from him. Right? That's the best I think I can do with that. Somebody else?
Yeah. So, should I? Okay. For next month it's just reading book 1 of the Republic.
Yes.
Homework. Okay, and then
I would recommend that you, as soon as you possibly can, if you want to get the most you can out of this, as soon as you can, do a quick and dirty reading of the Republic. Here I'm talking about the Death March, forced march through it. Why? Because you're not going to be able to read it the first time until you get that first 0 reading out of the way. Trust me on this. All right. What looks like incoherence is in fact something like the tile work on a really beautiful mosque. In other words, there's an astonishing geometry to this thing. Every word in that whole thing is there for a reason. I am not joking. In the same way, if the tiles went wrong in the mosque, that would have to come down. Plato doesn't have that problem.
Okay, cool.
Oh, and also, by the way, the book will teach you how to read itself.
All right. Also, where do you draw the line between the ethical and the aesthetic, or the active and the contemplative life?
It's the pursuit of the good and pursuit of the beautiful. Sometimes they overlap. The difficulty is they don't always. Think, for example, that many of us have some moral objection to violence, and yet it's undeniable that violence can be beautiful. If you have ever seen old tapes of Muhammad Ali boxing, it's just breathtaking. He's really good at what he does. And yeah, it's violence, but you can't separate it from a certain sort of beauty. The Iliad is about a combination of the good and the beautiful, but his idea of the good is very primitive. It's starkly and naively moving.
Yeah, so I guess the religions, like Christianity needed Constantine to advance it, like Buddhism, Ashoka, and of course the Greeks, Alexander. So it's like, what they did, they killed people, but they brought all those ideas out there. So it's kind of
That's exactly right. Look, the idea that it's big news that people did awful stuff to each other throughout history. It's only news if you get your history from Disney movies. All right. Real historical stuff, it's pretty bloody. It's pretty difficult. There's a new, because I'm writing a history of the world, there's a new element in our evidence, which is ancient DNA. And we can actually find one population displacing, that's the nice way of putting it, displacing others. And they displace them in two ways, pretty much. There's the 45% and the 95%. The 45% works this way. All the men get killed, right? And a few of the women get killed, and then they just get incorporated and used for reproduction of the new invading group. That is actually how the history of Spain worked. The entire Iberian Peninsula, it's the 45% solution. Now, that's bad, because that's like I don't know, any of the really genocidal regimes that we've seen in the 20th century. But it gets worse, the 95% solution. That just means kill everything you find. Male, female, animal, vegetable, mineral, kill it all. And that's what happened in, for example, the history of England. In fact, the people who created Stonehenge are completely unrelated in a genetic sense, either from the male or female line, to the people who defended England against William the Conqueror in 1066. You go to those cemeteries, this is a completely different people. They had 3,500 years in which to kill off everybody they had found there, and they succeeded in doing so. And there's just no getting around it. And these are not unusual activities. There's actually quite a bit of this. And this is just, well, no more Disney history for us.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time. Thanks for answering my question.
It's always a pleasure. I mean, I'd like to encourage all your pursuit of knowledge. It's good for you. It's one of the things you can count on. What else? Who wants a question?
I did have a question, actually.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, so you had mentioned that, there's the version 1.0, version 2.0 of the Greek hero.
Yep.
And it moves from kind of a violence, a brutality to, as you said, mind and muscle. Was
intellectual violence.
Right. Being somewhat, having some subtlety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that was a natural evolution in Greek civilization? Do we know that? Or was that Homer trying to, I guess, kind of make this coherent and influence Greek society in that way?
Well, if you're asking me, are these heroes prescriptive? In other words, telling people what to do, basing themselves on this model, or is it descriptive of the way people actually work? It's actually simultaneously both, because you got to remember there are generations, even centuries, of around the campfire stories told of great Hector and great Ajax and the great heroes. And then some intelligent bard learned the stories and found a way to sew them together to create a kind of narrative, to turn it into a plot. So it seems to me like it is simultaneously descriptive of at least some of the earliest elements in Greek culture, kind of the Viking element. And it's also intended to be prescriptive, because these men that are being talked about are viewed as being admirable and worthy of emulation. So they are also being used to bring up the next generation. So it's both prescriptive and descriptive. Fathers would learn it and make sure their sons learned it.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was the question. So thank you.
Yep. Another question.
So I had a quick question that I think would benefit everyone. And forgive me for my frankness, but you had previously alluded to things such as Bloom's translation and everything being there for a reason. So Leo Strauss would often refer to this as the logographic necessity, and this would come from Plato's Phaedrus. So, and I've been wondering about this with all of your lectures, even from those decades ago. To what extent will the following seminars be premised upon this idea of the logographic necessity, and more particularly as why that would make Bloom's translation the most relevant? So, for example, every student of Strauss kind of took this as a given in terms of interpreting any work of Plato or Xenophon or Aristotle, for example. And this is kind of what opened the door for the idea that writers such as these write duplicitously, and that the meaning is not always univocal. And that's why there seems to be this tension between the philosopher and polis, for example. And so while Bloom might take this very far in some regards, I'm just wondering to what extent that might be in your mind as you would go through the Republic.
Wow. Okay. How can I say? That's a very complicated forest of questions. I mean, so it's a many-headed animal. A couple of things to think about, I'd be inclined to say. I like Bloom's translation because unless you put in a couple of years so you can at least dog paddle around the Greek, it is easy to make mistakes about what is and is not there. Okay. For example, I believe it is Paul Shore's translation that lacks the word doulos, and in Greek that's slave. Paul Shore is committed to the idea that there's no slaves in Plato's Republic. There is, in fact, one reference to slave in Plato's Republic, and it's doulos. So in Shore he gives us some euphemism like servant. Bloom is saying, look, he's talking about slaves. And if he mentions it once, it's not an accident. He's just telling you that they're not all that important, but they'll be there. Okay, so that'll be part of the property given to his bronze people. Households will have slaves. Most did then, so it wouldn't have been so unusual. Now, let's see. The problem of writing. Writing is speech that's been dehydrated, and you have to add the living water in order to be able to make this palatable. And the problem is that it's easy to get them wrong because they can't defend themselves. Think about how many, I mean, well, I don't know, I've been an undergrad, I was an undergraduate teacher for a long time, and how many undergraduates find some book in the course of a semester, and they've decided that they are going to settle a score with it, right? And they do that in the easiest way possible by pretending it says stuff it doesn't say, and then arguing against those things it doesn't say, and then wondering what the problem is. So I think that what we want first is a good grasp of what it literally says. Sometimes, fair enough, that might be misleading. There's no perfect translation, but among the imperfect ones, I find this more useful, right? And the reason I find it more useful is the same reason that Thomas Aquinas found William of Moerbeck's translations of Aristotle useful. Aquinas, who's the great medieval interpreter of Aristotle, doesn't know Greek. But he has William of Moerbeck, a literal guy who plods along. And if you think about what Aristotle's work is like, that literal translation just begs to be done of Aristotle. I mean, I don't think anyone ever accused Aristotle of being excessively poetic. So you're not going to lose any of the metaphorical niceties. On the other hand, with Plato, there's a much greater temptation to say, I could be a better poet than him. And I think that if you can, then you shouldn't be a translator. You should just go write those poems. show some respect, right? And I think that the literal translation is the beginning of understanding, not the end of it. All right. I'll save you 2 years at least studying Greek. There's a start. What else?
Hi, Doctor.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a personal question, and it's also somewhat advice. I just recently started my first year undergrad in university, and it just reinforced to me like how, I mean, I'm Canadian, but I'm sure it's not too dissimilar in the States, that the lack of heroism, and just even going back to kind of Homeric heroism with men, like young men just doing something big, kind of like what Nietzsche was trying to get to. I feel kind of like you just feel so crushed trying to, I don't know how to say this, is trying to find a space for yourself that isn't just this kind of egalitarian conformity where we're all trying to be, I think, as you said before, we're all trying to be mandarins now. We're just how can you fit into the bureaucracy? I'm just wondering how, if maybe I'm off point,
I think
or
I know where
yeah,
you're going with this.
yeah.
Look, these are difficult times. No, I mean, part of the reason why we find it so difficult is that we imagine that other people are having a really easy time, but no, everything looks like it's easy until you actually start doing that. In the same way, think about getting to know people. Everybody looks sane until you get to know them, and then you realize that they're half crazy, right? But they still manage to get along. Okay, so I'd be inclined to say that what you're looking for is a way of orienting yourself. It's a good idea to go to a university. It's the best investment you're going to make in yourself. I think a lot of what goes on at universities is deeply corrupt.
Yeah.
And I think that much of it is a combination of rage and the hunger for power. And so my daughter is finishing up her PhD. My middle daughter is finishing up her PhD the end of this year. And I'm glad that she decided not to go into academics. She's not going to be a professor.
Yeah.
You know, it's just too crazy. And it's become so corrupt that it needs a general overhaul, our system of education. So what I would say, I mean, my daughter is up at another daughter is up at UT, Toronto, and she says that there's a lot of conformity in thought, and there's certain bounds you don't extend past. But she still finds it an enjoyable place to have that part of her life, and I think you can too. But the thing is, look, don't pick fights unless you have a reason to, right?
Yeah.
And that especially goes with your professors. Some of them are going to be reasonable and open-minded and demand that you go to the other side of an argument just to show that you have something in the way of intellectual ability. Not everybody's like that, but that's how university education really should work, forcing people to read stuff they don't like.
Right. Well, I've already been told basically we don't do Plato here or Aristotle, but we're going to read Horkheimer. Or to just throw us in the deep end of stuff that's more contemporary, but I don't know.
But the idea that anyone would compare Horkheimer to Plato and Aristotle and say, well, we don't do that stuff. I mean, when I hear stuff like that going on, and I've heard it from others too, what you're watching is people who have a new construction method. They start the building from the roof down. And it turns out to be much more advantageous because it's much easier if you know where the roof is going to be, which will be on the top. So they gradually jack the thing up, and they never get to the foundation. They just give you a roof, whatever the most important book of the last 15 minutes is. And you can go through college never reading Aristotle, Plato, never reading Shakespeare. Here's the deal. No one is going to give you an education. You want an education, you got to take charge of it yourself. get your own education. If you don't have a reading schedule, get one, make one. If you have the chance during the summer and you can make the chance, read all of whatever author you like best in your freshman year. For me, it was Shakespeare, and then Plato, and then Nietzsche. So
Thank you, Doctor.
my
I
pleasure.
think I'll remember that for sure.
Yeah, you can all call me Mike. You don't have to call me Doctor. As my
Just-
mother used to say, my late mother.
Yeah.
My son is the kind of doctor that doesn't help people. Can't
We'll all
write
get to know each other,
prescriptions.
right? Over time.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go. I really don't have much stamina anymore. These meds are pretty strong that I take. There's some nasty stuff, expensive nasty stuff running through me. So I would like to welcome everybody that would like to read Plato and learn about the Greeks. And I want to try and show you what I see when I read the Greeks. Right? And it's a real adventure, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks,
All right, my
Mike.
pleasure.
Thank you, man. Have a good
My
one.
pleasure.
Thank you.
God bless.
Good well.
See you in a month.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's so nice to see you. There's a whole bunch of faces there.
God
that
bless
are
you.
hiding out. Yeah, God bless us all.
Wait, are you gonna record them in the future? The lectures?
I think I didn't I?
Oh, do you know how? You
I
go
have
to
no
Today we
idea.
did not.
and you
No,
hit
I just
the
get
button that
look.
says
I get
record.
one of the students from the university to do this. You don't think that I'm going to try and do? No. That's a mistake from the word go. We're never going to have anything on the internet if I'm left. It's like having Achilles figure out the Trojan horse. It's not happening.
Mike,
We'll still be waiting.
Mike, just a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Some of the sections that you want us to read, like for the first philosopher, for the
Yep.
Socratic and so forth, I think, like, if you can get someone to just put some of the sections there, then
I
we can
will.
just
I will.
read
I'll
That'd
do
be
that
great.
tonight.
Thank you
I'll do
very
that.
much. Thanks
All
for
right,
the
absolutely.
Take care, everyone.
The
I hope everyone-
very
pre-Socratics
much.
should make you crazy. It's good for you. Right? You can see whether we're going to be or become. What happens then?
Being
All right.
is becoming.
See you in a month. All right, stop. You know where this
All right,
goes.
thank you.
Makes you crazy.
See
Good
you
night.
in a month. Thank
Night.
you so much.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.